Hello students, welcome back to this program on the interlinkage and decoding of anthropology syllabus. And today we are into the third session of this, and I think the first two videos were useful enough. And I see the Anthro Hub starting to flourish into and spread into multiple colors. And I am really thankful to Dr. Manvika and Raja Reddy sir for giving me this opportunity to continue this series. Now in today's session, the third session, we are going to discuss about the decoding and the interlinking of the syllabus of the anthropological theories. Now most of you will have an issue that is existing with respect to this chapter on theories, that is chapter 6. The fundamental reason why most of the students have an issue here is you do not know or you will not be able to understand the logical order, but you try to by heart this. Because when you look at the broader perspective of this anthropological theories, it fundamentally talks about, on a broader perspective, how as the culture evolved. That is the fundamental understanding with respect to this anthropological theories. Because when you look at anthropology as an understanding, as a field of study, you know that it is understanding the biological, social and cultural elements of a human being. And in this understanding or in this context, the number of anthropologists, the number of thinkers have come up with understanding that how is this phenomena of culture in a particular society evolved. Now, this studies on evolution of culture has been supported by field studies by some of the anthropologists and has been brought in with certain conventions by certain anthropologists and has been believed with certain extrapolations by some anthropologists. Now with such a kind of broader understanding about this anthropological theories, that is the onset of the culture and the evolution of culture in various societies that is existing. Now when you look at the broader perspective of anthropological theories, you see that the theories start to have a trend from, they start moving from general to specific. They move from general to specific. Apart from that, they also see that the move from or they shift from no field work to field work. This is what is the general understanding that we are discussing right now. So they move from general to specific, they move from no field work to field work. Then apart from that, when you look at the third broader aspect of this anthropological theories, you see that the nature of the study is more comprehensive. And the nature of the study will start to get abstract in nature. Because now what happens is, in the initial theories of this anthropological thought, be it your classical evolutionism or be it the functionalism, what we generally see, or diffusionism, what we generally understand is most of the hypothesis is based on the material evidences that has been brought in. But when you look at the later aspects like the cognitive anthropology, or when you talk about your symbolic anthropology, we get to understand the observations are more or less abstract. So with such kind of broader understanding about this anthropological theory with respect to these three particular trends that are existing, let's start understanding what is this, each of this phenomena talking about. Now when you look at this classical evolutionism, it forms the basis of the thought, it forms the basis of theory with respect to the evolution of culture. And in this, you know the E.B. Taylor existing, you know the L.H. Morgan, you know the James Fraser. And the major issue that is existing with respect to this classical evolutionism, you see that they talk about an hierarchy of evolution, and you see that most of their observations lacked field studies except some questionnaire form of field studies by L.H. Morgan. And when you look at this particular aspect of classical evolutionism and E.B. Taylor studies, we can be able to relate this E.B. Taylor studies with respect to the animatism that we study in the chapter of religion, because E.B. Taylor had studied the primitive religions and the form of primitive religion is animism. Then again, when you look at the Fraser, we will be able to understand and we will be able to link the studies of Fraser, the Golden Bough, we will be able to link with respect to the studies on religion, magic and science. Because They fundamentally said that as part of this classical evolutionism, it evolved stage by stage from religion to magic to science. So this is what is interlinkage that exists with respect to the classical evolutionism. Then moving on further, we see a similar pattern, a similar trend has been followed by the diffusionism, but you see that they have hypothesized the evolution of culture in the context of the spread of culture, in the context of the diffusion of the culture. And there are different understandings with respect to the diffusion of the culture. There are different understandings with respect to the origin of culture. For example, if you look at the British diffusionism, it talks about a phenomenon called pan-Egyptianism. That means that whole of the culture that has been existing, that has been diffused, has originated in Egypt. That is what is the fundamental understanding. Or when you look at the German understanding, or when you look at the American understanding, you see talk of German understanding fundamentally talks about culture crease. Right? Then when you talk about the American understanding, you talk about something called as culture center. So there are different kinds of perceptions that are seen with respect to the cultural evolution. But again, the fundamental issue that lies with respect to the classical evolutionism and diffusionism, we see it to be the ethnocentric approach. The ethnocentric approach. And not only the ethnocentric approach, but they lack majorly the field study, they lack majorly the participant observation, they lack majorly the different methodologies of research that are involved in the studies. Now from there we see a transition happening to the historical particularism, especially emphasized by Franz Boas. And here when you talk about this historical particularism, we get to see that it fundamentally emphasized a lot on, if you have to understand the culture, we have to understand the history that is existing behind the culture. And it talks about that this history is very, very specific to a particular culture. Every culture has a different history. That is what is the simple understanding of historical particularism. That means it not only brought in an element of relativism, but it also got rid of the phenomenon of ethnocentric approach that is seen with respect to the classical evolutionism and diffusionism. And apart from that, we see one categorical demarcation that is made by this particular theory, that it talks so much upon the field work, it talks so much upon the field studies in order to understand this theory. Then from there, when you move on to talk about the functionalism, that is, we know that the functionalism can be the cultural functionalism and structural functionalism. And when we talk about the cultural functionalism, we know that Malinowski happens to be the individual that is existing with respect to this particular theory when he was studying the Trobriand Islanders. And when you look at this cultural functionalism, the Malinowski talks that culture is an integrated whole. That means when you observe these particular trends about understanding of the evolution of culture, you get to see that culture was an hierarchical phenomena, culture was an hierarchical evolution phenomena, but now you see that it has become an integrated concept. That's what I meant. The nature of study started to slowly become abstract. From hierarchy, now it became an integrated approach. Now once we see this functionalism with respect to Malinowski talking about culture being an integrated whole, we can relate this functionalist tendencies of Malinowski even in the functional approach of religion. Not only the functional approach of religion, but also with respect to the phenomena that we see in this context of the economic organization, that is especially in the context of the meaning, scope and relevance of economic anthropology. And we also see that the principles governing on the reciprocity, redistribution and market. Right? In all these aspects we can discuss about the Malinowski's theory here. Then apart from that, when we talk about the structural functionalism, that is with respect to the R.C. Brown. And when we talk about the structural functionalism majorly emphasizes upon the social structure, the social function and the social organization. And we see that this R.C. Brown's theory of structural functionalism deriving itself from Emile Durkheim's theory of organic solidarity. Because we know that the Emile Durkheim's theory of organic solidarity and mechanical solidarity existing, and we see that this organismic approach has been borrowed from the Emile Durkheim's theory. Right? So with such a kind of understanding, when we move forward with respect to this, we talk about the structuralism phenomena. And when you look at the structuralism phenomena, by looking out, by understanding the mechanistic theory and the statistical models of Levi-Strauss, and what we get to see is that every society has two different kinds of structures that are existing. One particular structure is the surface structure, the other one is the deep structure. And the Levi-Strauss observation about the structuralism and talking about the culture is once we are able to understand the deep structure of different societies. Once we are able to understand the deep structures of different societies, we will be able to understand the cultural similarity that is existing between the society 1, that is existing between the society 2, that is existing between the society 3. Now again, apart from this, when we look at this, what we see that we also have the deep structures or the surface structures that are existing. And when you look at the surface structures, when we look at the surface structures that we get to see, here the surface structures are different for different societies. And what happens is the Levi-Strauss categorically talks about understanding the deep structure of a society by entering through the surface structure. Now all of this phenomena is going to boil down to understand the evolution of culture, to understand the differences of culture, to understand the cultural dynamism, to understand the cultural similarities that are existing between different societies. And it says that this deep structure is going to exist in a similarity which is resulting or which is showing a kind of cultural similarity among the societies. Then from there we went on to see, or we go on to see, that the culture starts to be influenced by the personality, that is, which is talking or which is talked about by culture personality school. And when we look at this culture personality school, it talks about a reciprocal relation that is existing between the culture influencing the personality and personality influencing the culture. And when we look at this reciprocal relation that is existing, what we get to understand is that now the culture as a phenomena has an influencing factor in the form of personality. And we see that culture is not only being influenced by the personality, but we also get to understand that culture also influences personality. That is what is this 5 different anthropologies that are present in the culture personality school talking about. And we also have different kinds of personalities, that is the model personality that is existing. Then we also have Ralph Linton's concept of status and role. Right? So all these are aspects which are showing that the cultural evolution has happened with an influence. And from there, we see the 20th century understanding of the culture and the corresponding cultural evolution coming in with the onset of the neo-evolutionism. And in this context of neo-evolutionism, now the study slowly started to become objective, the study slowly started to become interlinking, the study slowly started to consider the multiple factors that are influencing the culture. Because when we look at the G.V. Child's understanding about the neo-evolutionistic tendencies, he talks about the Neolithic revolution, and he talks about the Neolithic age being a revolution for the reason you see so much of evolution happening in the context of Neolithic cultures. And again, when we look at the Leslie Alvin White, he is known for his studies on culturology. His studies on culturology, that means it's talking about the science of the culture. And not only that, the Leslie Alvin White with respect to the culture energy approach. The culture energy approach that is present. Then again we talk about Julian H. Stewart, and when you look at this Julian H. Stewart, we see that culture ecology approach that is present with respect to Julian H. Stewart. That means, and when you talk about the Hollins and Service, we see about the specific and general evolution. Now in this school of neo-evolution is we see that culture being influenced by major factors like energy, like ecology, like specificities, like general aspects, like the material technology that is available, like the extent of time period that is present. Right? So what is happening is we have seen that culture was a hierarchy in the classical evolutionism and diffusionism. And from there it moved to an integrated concept. From there it moved to a factor which is being influenced. Now from here we also see that the cultural materialism as a phenomena of the Marvin Harris. And when you look at this cultural materialism as a phenomena of Marvin Harris, we see the emic view and the etic view coming onto the surface of the studies with respect to the anthropological thought, and also the cultural materialism categorically dealing about that each layer of the society is somehow going to influence the other. And you see that that kind of influence is going to result in a different kind of cultural practices. And we see that this can be an extension of the historical particularism of Franz Boas, where it said that every culture had an history. In the similar manner, here we see that every society will have different structure, that is infrastructure, substructure and superstructure, and we see that each of the layer of this society is going to influence the other, and we see the resultant phenomena is the cultural dynamism that is existing. That is what is studied by the Marvin Harris. And from there we see the onset of the symbolic and interpretative theories. Now in this concept, you see the culture as a phenomena will slowly start to get abstract, will slowly start to get, and it depends upon the perception of the observer in the context of the field studies that is being done. And when you look at this symbolic and interpretative theories, that is especially with respect to the Victor Turner, or that is with respect to the D.M. Snyder or Clifford Geertz, here we get to see that symbolic approach is majorly given by the Victor Turner, and the interpretative approach was majorly given by the Clifford Geertz. Now here what happens is Victor Turner talks about the social transformation that is involved with respect to the symbols. And when I talk about the Clifford Geertz, it is said that the symbols are the vehicles of culture. So here what is happening is that whole of the culture of a particular society is being restricted to the kind of symbols that are being used by that particular society. And you see, for example, when I talk about the Victor Turner study of Madahi tree in Ndembu society, it talks about the ritual symbolism. Or when you talk about the Clifford Geertz study of the Indonesian face mask, or when you talk about the Bali cockfights. So what is happening is it fundamentally talks about the observation of the participant or observation of the anthropologist regarding the culture of that society, and that culture is fundamentally determined by the nature of the symbols being used, right? And here the extension of this symbolic and interpretative theory is what we get to understand in the context of cognitive theories, because now cognitive theory is the Stephen A. Taylor or Harold C. Conklin. What happens is here the major aspect is that culture is a cognitive phenomena. Culture is what is the thought of the individual, and you see that culture being the thought of the individual, and this thought being manifested in the form of a symbol usage, that is what is we see in the context of symbolic and interpretative theory. And when you see that the culture is merely a thought, merely a mind or mental construct, we see it in the context of cognitive anthropology or cognitive theories, right? That is maybe with respect to the comparison between the Koya society and the American society, with respect to the perception of snow, with respect to the perception of bamboos, right? Or we might be with respect to the perception of the colors of different plants that are existing. So that is with respect to the cognitive theory. Now till here what happens, or what we observe generally in this chapter of anthropological thought, is that we see that there are different perception about the evolution of the culture, and that perception has been changing from something which is hierarchical to something which is abstract in nature, something which is considered as a mental construct, something which is considered as a process of thought of an individual, process of a thought of an human being. Now all of this demanded an element of fieldwork, demanded an element of participant observation. And when you look at the last school which talks about this evolution of culture, that is the postmodernism. And this postmodernism will talk about the bringing the understanding of the culture to the maximum objective condition possible. It focuses on the objectivity of the understanding of the cultural evolution rather than criticizing the above schools with the element of subjectivity being present, with the element of ethnocentric approach being present, with the element of colonial mindset being present in studying the society, in studying the cultural evolution. Now, with such a kind of understanding, now this particular chapter of 6, which is the anthropological thought, can be safely interlinked with the 8th chapter, that is the research methods in anthropology. Now, when you talk about the fieldwork tradition, we know that fieldwork tradition was fundamentally revolutionized by Malinowski, because we can see that in the fieldwork tradition there was an era of pre-Malinowski, there was an era of during Malinowski, and there was an era of post-Malinowski. And here we get to understand that Malinowski was known for his participant observation in the context of Trobriand islanders. And we see a number of phenomena being studied in the context of religion, in the context of economy, in the context of Kula exchange, in the context of Urubbu systems. All these started to exist there. Now again, after that, what we see, that we can also link this particular chapter 6 of the tools of data collection. We can link it with this tools of data collection, because we know that we have participant observation, we know that there is interviews, we know that there is schedules, we know that there is questionnaire, we know that there is case studies, we know that there is genealogy. So there are different kinds of tools that are available, right? And each of this tool was differently used by most of these thinkers or most of these anthropologists that we studied in the anthropological theory. So for this particular chapter, the examples of chapter 8 can be derived from chapter 6, the studies that you study in chapter 6. right? That is what is the interlinkage that is existing between chapter 6 and chapter 8 of paper 1. Now from there we go on to see the interlinkage that is existing with respect to the chapter 6 and how is it interlinked in the context of paper 2. Now when you look at the paper 2, we know that chapter 4 will also happen to be the anthropological thought in the context of India, and we have to see how we can link this particular thing. Because when we look at this particular chapter 4 of paper 2, what we see is the contributions of Indian anthropologists. And when you look at this Indian anthropologists, what we get to understand is that we see that most of the thinkers that we had studied would influence these Indian anthropologists, especially in the context of tribal and caste studies. Because what happens is, when you talk about the nature man spirit complex, we get to see that there was an influence of the theories of seculars and profane in the context of Emile Durkheim. Or Emile Durkheim's study with respect to organic solidarity has influenced this study. So we see that there is so much of interlinkages that is existing between the chapter 6 of paper 1 and chapter 4 of paper 2. Right? And we also see the R.C. Brown's influence, especially with respect to structural functionalists like M.N. Srinivas. Right? We have various other thinkers. For example, we talk about Oscar Levy, or we talk about Heimendorf, or we talk about S.C. Roy, we talk about S.C. Dubé, right? We talk about N.K. Bose, or we talk about the multiple kinds of the thinkers that are present with respect to the paper 2, right? Or maybe the Iravati Karve that we see. So what happens is, now whenever you are answering a question on the chapter 4 of paper 2, please remember that you have to bring in chapter 6 interlinkage. And you cannot afford to live, because it talks about contribution of 18th, 19th and early 20th century. 18th, 19th and early 20th century, because we see that the influence of the classical evolutionists also happening with respect to the context of caste studies and the context of theories of origin of caste. And we also see that the influence of the neo-evolutionists happening especially in understanding the culture, in understanding the caste, in understanding the aspects regarding the tribal culture. And we also see the structural functionalist theory being utilized in studying the villages. Right? For example, M.N. Srinivas is a classic example for structural functionalism, right, or structural functionalist. Right? Apart from that, what happens is we see that the symbolism, the ritual symbolism, that is the Victor Turner's symbolic theory, what we see is we come across a theory called rites de passage. We talk about rites de passage and we talk about the rituals, or we talk about liminality. Now in this context we can happily link the Turner's theory, and we see that these are going to be part of the village systems. These are going to be the part of village systems, because we know that we see number of theories that are coming about the village system being the independent as well as interdependent systems, right? Village systems being republic on its own. So all of these theories can be substantiated with respect to the knowledge that you have studied in chapter 6. Okay. Now apart from this, if you have to look at what is the relevance of chapter 6 in the context of paper 2, you can talk about the, especially in this 9.2 and 9.3 of paper 2. The 9.2 and 9.3 of paper 2, where you see the role of anthropology in tribal and rural development. And we see role of anthropology of understanding the regionalism, communalism, ethnic and political movements. Now in these understandings, in these particular chapters, what we see, we can safely utilize chapter 6, we can safely utilize chapter 8 of paper 1, and we can also to an extent utilize the chapter 2.1 and chapter 2.2 of paper 1. So what is happening is, here you know that anyway this is a manifestation, or this is an applicative aspect of chapter 4 of paper 2 that we just discussed. So what is happening is, we see that once we have a decent amount of understanding on this evolution of culture as part of your chapter 6, as part of the anthropological thought, we get to see that we can interlink it with chapter 4 of paper 2 and the other aspects regarding the applicative aspect, because you know that you see the branches of applied anthropology, you see the branches of action anthropology coming into the vogue, and what happens is, in that context of applied anthropology and action anthropology, especially contextualizing that application to India, we can utilize this chapter 6 in the context of 9.2 and 9.3, right? So with this understanding, we come to the end of this particular discussion. Thank you.